So one question I have for you, so when you first arrived in Puerto Rico, something that I've always really appreciate about you, and I think a lot of people do, is that you're very sincere and you don't pretend to know things that you don't know. And so when you showed up here, you were very honest about, the fact that you didn't know a lot about Puerto Rico before coming here and, had just arrived to do this story. At what point do you think you realized either that Puerto Rico was special or that you had a connection to it or that it was just a place that deserved more coverage? Like, what was the turning point for you?
I instantly realized on day one, after I got off the
Wow.
evening news, there was, but let me tell you what I realized that day. That was the day I realized I can't just leave everything on the edit room floor that didn't make it into the 2-minute story that we did. I was like, wait a minute. It felt Miss Bonilla too urgent, too necessary, too life sustaining. And the interesting part is I didn't have much of a social media following at that point. Like, not really much at all. So it wasn't an attempt to pander to an audience. It wasn't an attempt to go out there and get something that I was looking for. It just felt urgent. And so I picked up my phone and I started talking, and I didn't know where it was going to go. This would have been the evening news ended at 6:45. We got back to the conference room at the Marriott at about 7. I probably did this first report, and I haven't even gone back to look at the first report. I would like to, but I did this first report, and we woke up the next day, and my life as I kind of had known it had changed. But the reality is, I never stopped to become self-aware of it. I was
How did it change?
It changed because hundreds of thousands of people were now following what I was doing. But I wasn't aware of it because I wasn't sitting there reading the comments. Because the information that people needed to know and people needed to be told was so urgent and so voluminous that there was never a moment, I guarantee you there was never a moment where I ever sat down and said, wow, let's go through this. Never did. I would hear from my colleagues, so-and-so saying this, so-and-so saying this. And I realized then that I wasn't there to just do a morning report and an evening report. The reporting never stopped. It was unlike any reporting I've ever done. Ever. I've never done anything like that. But then I think it's because I've never covered something that involved a catastrophic collapse. Everything as we knew it there collapsed. The government collapsed, the healthcare system collapsed, nothing worked. Not a single thing. So my urgency and sense of urgency was not feigned in any way. It was real, because that really was what was happening. It's only after the fact that I was able to look back and go, wow, that turned into something, didn't it? So the reason I call journalism a lifeline today is because of what I learned in Puerto Rico, because of what the people who stop me in the airports and the bodegas and the movie theaters tell me. It was a lifeline because I would have had no other way to get information. That's when somebody like me goes, whoa, we're doing serious business here. This is real serious. So I walked away from Puerto Rico with a reverence for journalism that I didn't have before. Because in all fairness, it's hard to be reverent about something that you haven't walked through. You can hear people speak of reverence. You can hear people preach to you about how it's a public service. But until you go through it,
How do you feel about the fact that Puerto Rico is not more present in mainstream news, especially after the hurricane?
it frustrates me consistently. And the reason it doesn't sort of boil over for me is because I have this. I have the place to ensure that it is heard, and something I get such joy from is running into someone who has no connection to Puerto Rico, is not Puerto Rican, and maybe doesn't know anybody who's Puerto Rican, who starts telling me about issues in Puerto Rico because they're following my coverage.
Yeah.
That's when it's like, okay, this is working. This is working here. Because we need random people to be aware of what's happening. Yes, it's important to keep the Puerto Ricans informed, and arguably, of course, they're going to come to it because they want the information. But the lady in Arizona is interested in it too. The lady in San Francisco and, Fresno. So That's
Yeah.
what I really love, is getting those
Yeah.
people to kind of sit up and pay attention.
As an educator, I always tell people what's most important. When they're like, "What can I do for Puerto Rico? Where can I donate?" I'm like, I think the most important thing is to raise consciousness, because everything that happens in terms of U.S. policy towards Puerto Rico happens in great part because they count on the silence around the U.S. territories and the ignorance around them. Which I always tell my students to not feel bad about their ignorance, because it's the product of a systemic silencing.
Oh, that's powerful. Systemic silencing. Can I add something to that? I think it is my ignorance which drove me to do what I did in Puerto Rico, and let me explain. I was not aware of the colonial relationship with the United States and the history. I was not aware of the feeling of second-class citizenship. I was not aware that Puerto Rico didn't have voting representation in the Congress. So I went there and I said, as I saw injustices playing out in front of me, beginning with the slow response, I said, well, this is BS. This is unacceptable. And what I encountered were people who were like, oh yeah, but it is, and oh yeah, but it is. And I remember thinking, oh, no, 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 we're going to ring that bell 5 times until they hear it. And we're going to call him, and we're going to call her, and we're going to... And I think that naivete and that ignorance served me well. Because had I gone into the hurricane aware of everything I'm aware of now, I might have sat back and been like, well, yeah, but, that's just how it is. That's just how it is down here,
Yeah, yeah. Which I think for a lot of local reporters, sometimes we're so used to hear certain aspects of the colonial situation that they don't really get us indignant in the same way. I mean, there's a kind of constant indignation. But since we're not discovering it for the first time, and I have to admit, sometimes, my friends and I, we text, we're like, oh, look at David, he's discovering colonialism, isn't he cute, But I think that I absolutely agree with you that has allowed for a certain level of reporting that folks here don't necessarily do because it's our bread and butter, That's a question I had for you too. Is what has been your relationship to local journalists, and how do you think about them in relationship to what you're doing?
So I think one thing I want to continue to do more of is support them, because I just want to support my own. The language barrier for me is consistently difficult because I am not able to benefit from fully understanding what their reporting is consistently beyond what Google Translate tells me. And so I reached out to Carla, for example, who runs the Center for Investigative Reporting, because I wanted to get the English article regarding the epidemiologist on the island who has been making some misleading statements at a time when misinformation can lead to death. And so she said to me, absolutely, we're getting it up. And I was actually on the island, as many of you know, for the earthquakes, and they asked me to do a fundraiser for them. And I said, I'm happy to. And so at the fundraiser, one of the things that I asked of them, really the only thing that I asked, was, please send me as much as you can in English. Because Lord knows I want to amplify it and highlight it, but I am really hobbled by the fact that I don't speak Spanish. I don't let it discourage me to the point where I back away and stop doing it. But if I were to factor in, Ms. Bonilla, all the time it takes me from relying on wonderful people to help me translate, or me on Google Translate, it is hundreds of hours. I couldn't even tell you. So I follow the work of journalists. I also, I went to one of the universities when I was there for Puerto Rico Live, PR Live. That would have been in January. And one of the things I told the students was there were some allegations in the Ricky chats that some organizations appeared to be somewhat in bed with the government. And one thing I do not like doing is shaming other people, because I got a lot of shame as a child for being gay and having Tourette's. And so projecting shame on other people is not a place that I go to.
Mm-hmm.
But you can speak to someone who's doing something wrong and sort of guide them. And so what I told these students at the university was, if a politician is your friend, you're probably getting off on the wrong foot. Because at the end of the day, you're going to have to ask some tough questions that a politician will try and say, now come on, are you really going to do that to me? And that starts to lead down a slippery slope. So what I also want to say to the journalists in Puerto Rico is I want to empower them and support them into saying, should not allow yourself to be bullied, so that you get into this point where you're kind of in bed when next thing you know the government calls and there's a little back pat here and a back pat there and all kinds of. So again, I'm not calling anybody out. I'm just saying that I don't run in those circles, and I realize that I don't pretend to know how journalists on the island feel. I support them. I want to empower them. I want to help them any way that I can. But I also want to say that the standards and practices of CBS News are some really strong standards and practices. And some of the journalists on the island have come to me and said, I've learned a lot from you when it comes to the standards of how you do journalism. So, yeah, that's the best way to answer that question.
Yeah, I think a lot of folks here are grateful because, you have such a platform and you feature something and something happens, It's same with the first patient from Dr. Cabanilla. Like when he had already denounced, the local journalists had given him space. It's not like the journalists here are insensitive. But that doesn't get heard necessarily, but CBS News, gets involved and suddenly he gets tested,
But I will say that, and that is an unavoidable thing. I know that there is probably among some journalists on the island resentment that David comes in, he does something, and there's a change. I'm mindful of that. I'm not unaware of it. But I also don't want to back away just to make other people feel comfortable, because it's important.
There might be some people who might have some resentment or feel some kind of way about the ability that you're able to make things move. But I think everyone really respects you because you are aware of that. There's people who have power or privilege and aren't aware of it. And so I think the fact that you know that you have that and you wield it very responsibly, I think, we really respect you here in Puerto Rico. And a lot of the folks that I talk to, I have a lot of friends who are journalists. I write in the paper as well. And I think we feel that you have a role to play, that and it's an important role. I'm particularly moved by how so many Puerto Ricans in Puerto Rico in the diaspora who don't speak Spanish, who can't access CPI's Spanish coverage, who can't even access Univision, which is all in Spanish. There's really not a lot of platforms for that community, and that's something that's really moved me about the town halls too, seeing Puerto Rican from Alabama and from all these kind of unexpected places, and so those people are not being reached in other platforms. So I think that's something really important that you're contributing, and I don't think that there is a lot of resentment. I think people are happy that you're able to do that and that you're able to contribute. I think if you weren't moving the platforms that you have access to, then people would get salty, because it's like, why isn't, if he's able to do something and doesn't do it, One question I wanted to ask you is, since you started your coverage of Hurricane Maria, you've gone up through a lot of personal transformations. You really opened up on social media. You've come out. I don't know. I feel like you are in lots of ways, like you said before, living your dream, living your best life. To what extent did the coverage in Puerto Rico have this shift for you personally?
Well, so now you're asking a question that I told my mentor about a week ago. I have not answered publicly and I think honestly, but I will do it here. When you in life experience love from a person or a group of people that is both relentless and non-judgmental, it has a way of forcing you to drop any and all facades you have left. And I think what happened was the combination of the appreciation, the validation, and the support that I received changed me as a human being. I have grown more in the last 4 years than I did in the 20 prior. Sure, I grew taller, but I'm talking about emotionally, spiritually. So, and the reason I sort of have a lower tone when I talk about it is this happened during a tragedy on the backs of other people. And it's difficult for me to have this sort of reflective moment talking about, how much it evolved me as a person when it was such a tragedy. And so that's why I don't talk about it too much. That's why I'm uncomfortable to talk about it. But if I'm being 100% honest, that's what caused it. I feel the need to not let people down. I feel the need to not let the people of Puerto Rico down because they've given me so much. Again, when I talk about this is a platform that was given to me by them. I didn't build this platform. I didn't spend money to get it to where it is. This was a platform given to me by them. That's deep. That's heavy, right? And so I'm not going to walk away from that platform, and I certainly don't want to let those people down.
I'm always really struck by how you are a reporter for a national, mainstream, super mainstream, right, media outlet. It's not Univision. It's not geared towards a Latino audience, and yet you have such a strong Latino fan base. And how does that? Do you think that helps you or hinders you within CBS News?
I think it adds something to CBS News that wouldn't exist if I
And but
if
do they
I
encourage
wasn't
it?
there.
Do they encourage
Do they
it, or
do they
do you have to fight to get Puerto Rico news on, or do they see that as an asset that you bring?
They see it as a unique asset, and even they are interested by it because you would anticipate that someone who was Latino or Latina would be the person who did that. But here's David, and David's the one that brings that audience, right, or a significant part of that audience. But it's not easy. And I say this with all due respect. My organization has spent tens of thousands of dollars allowing me and my team to go down there and tell stories. Um, but it's not easy. I feel like it is consistently pushing a boulder uphill. Um, and I sometimes get frustrated, and I don't understand why it's so damn hard sometimes, because to
Yeah.
me it seems so obvious. There are tens of millions of people, I mean, it's like, and it comes down to this. Like, I will do a story about issues related to Puerto Rico or something, and it will be the most trafficked engaged thing that happens all day.
Wow.
And so I sort of sit back sometimes and I go, okay, remind me why that was so difficult to, like, and again, I'm not putting anybody on blast here. My company has led the way. We have
Yeah.
done more, arguably, than any other company. I'm talking about the main broadcast networks, the English language. But it's still difficult. It's still
Yeah.
difficult, and it gets me riled up. It gets me riled up, and there are times where I don't get what I want, and the answer is no, and I come here to do it, and I am okay with that, because you know
Yeah.
what? It feels good sometimes because there may be no room for it in terms of the show is full and there's not enough time, or maybe the cost is more than they want to spend. There's a lot of reasons that I respect. But then when I do the report and the engagement is 1 million and 2 million, I'm like, so I wasn't crazy. There's some interest there, and maybe we should have done it. So it's a constant tug and pull, and I'm okay. Look, life is not easy. There are things in life that are a constant tug and pull. I'll tell you, Ms. Bonilla, one thing I'd like to do is I would like to evolve into a way where I do some kind of collaboration with either Univision, Telemundo's NBC, and so it wouldn't work because I'm CBS. But if one day I was doing some kind of collaborative work with Univision, I would really like that because um, I don't project to know everything about the audience, but I certainly know enough to be able to add a voice to it. And I don't know. I'm sort of just putting that out there. I've said it before, and let's see how that happens. I'd love to collaborate with.
Yeah. I think there's a couple of interesting things about what you're saying, because what you're talking about of being frustrated, of having to push for those stories. I mean, that's what a lot of Latinos in newsrooms face, but it shows that it's not about the person, but about the topic. Like the difficulty of getting these topics, covered in a kind of mainstream way. But I think it's really important for those topics to not only be covered by Latinos, to not be kind of ghettoized, like, okay, this is the like boutique little, pet interest of Latino reporters. But no, these are issues that can interest any reporter and that can interest a broad audience also,
Yeah, and here's the thing. I was actually watching the town hall recently with Oprah about the book, American Dirt, and the controversy that has come about. And there were a lot of people there who were like, this is our story to tell. And I remember sitting on the couch here being like, oh no. And I had, oh no, meaning this. I had a moment where I was like, wow, I am lucky that that they accept a white guy who doesn't speak the language to be someone who can be a voice for them. I mean, that almost feels like a privilege. And that had not really hit me until I watched them saying, wait, it's our story. And when you come in and try and tell it, I was like, oh shit, that's what I do. I tell their story. Wow, what a privilege for them to allow me to do that. So yeah.
But I think what you do is a little different. I noticed, for example, that you put out a lot of calls asking people, tell me what you want to hear about. Tell me who I should talk to. Give me tips. I think you do recognize that it's not your story that you are trying to come here and find, but that you want to know what is other people's stories.
So in watching the American Dirt controversy, it made me ask a lot of questions of myself, such as, what we were talking about earlier. Do I have? Am I doing something to unfairly take advantage of a privilege that I have? It just did not occur to me that I might have a privilege that other people don't when it comes to telling a story. I mean, to me, it's always been very simple. Like, I go out and I tell the story. But watching that just made me ask some questions of myself. It was interesting. The town hall that Oprah did was a little uncomfortable to watch. It was a little soothing to the soul to see. I think in life, when we see consternation, we want to see some type of resolution. I think it's a natural human. Like, I need to know that it's going to be okay, and I think I was one of those people. Like, is this going to be okay? Like, by the time it's over, because it sure seemed a little like, ooh. But it was honest. It was real honest. And so, as for, I have not read the book. That's when you really know you're doing, I think, some powerful stuff, is when the person sitting at home is a little uncomfortable. You expect that the people in the chair might be uncomfortable. But like when the audience at home is like, ooh, I mean, I remember watching that town hall and I was like, oh my gosh, what is that lady going to say next? Like, is she going to come after Oprah? Or is Oprah going to be, it was something. But again, it was a valuable opportunity for a white man to sit back and look and say, okay, so maybe, I mean, quite honestly, Miss Bonilla, here's what I thought. Should I in the future ask whether a Latino or a Latina should tell the story? So I'm always about getting that in my stories, but it made me think, like, are there some times where maybe the bosses should say, no, we want her to do it because she is a part of that community? But then it also makes me think, like, when I think of LGBTQ issues, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I don't ever want to go cover an LGBTQ story and have them go, well, they sent a gay guy to do it, you know, or just as stupid as it would be if we sent a woman to cover issues involving women at the Supreme Court. They were like, oh, they sent a lady to do it, you know, so it
Yeah.
just, I don't know.
Or yourself as a reporter being pigeonholed into the queer beat, like, and that's what you have to cover because that's who you are, right?
That is correct.
Yeah.
That is correct.
Yeah.
But you also have to realize that for me, that possibility has been an evolution, because for so long I lied about
Right.
who I was, and so if you would have tried to put me on the queer beat, I'd have run for the hills, right? And if you would, I would have lived. And this is sad to say. This is sad to say, but it's the truth. I would have been so insulted to get that beat, because even though I am gay, getting to the place of acceptance was a long, difficult journey. And only now can I look at that with the respect that it deserves. Just that, to see, if I were to ever see somebody say, like, the queer beat, I know we're using this euphemism, but the queer beat, like, now I can say, oh yeah, that's a community to be served. Or the trans, like the story of Alexa. I think one reason I've been so passionate about covering it is because I have sat across from transgendered persons at the Gay and Lesbian Journalism Conference and watched some back and forths that got very uncomfortable from people in the transgender community who do not feel represented by the LGBT community telling their stories. So when I went to do the Alexa story, I thought, oh, number one, I want to do it. Number two, it wasn't, and that's another example of how my organization I have so much respect for, because it was in Puerto Rico. It involves the train. It was like 4 different elements of diversity that are underrepresented, that are boxes that everybody usually doesn't check, right? And they believed in it, and they said, go do it. And then they gave me 4 minutes to tell it on television. But as I did the story, let me give you one example. I have not told this. There was an individual, I won't say who was interviewed in the story, who was very unhappy with how it turned out. Very unhappy. And went on social media and made their unhappiness known. And basically what they said was, my identity and story was reduced to a soundbite. Well, number one, my ego got triggered. And my ego said, how could you be criticizing me when I interviewed you and put you in this, right? So, and then I had to say, wait a minute, hold on, your ego's getting triggered here, like sit down for a minute. And then I realized this, that opportunity was maybe the first or one of the few times that opportunity has ever been given. Number two, you have to realize that in underserved communities, when that opportunity is given and it's not there, sometimes we have to explain to people that you're not going to see all 30 minutes of the interview we did, right? Because people who may not watch the news regularly may not realize that we're not doing a half-hour documentary. I might interview you for 20 minutes, but we take 1 or 2 sound bites. So what I did was I didn't take it personally. And I had already planned to. I put the entire raw interview online, to which the individual immediately updated and said, it's on, I'm thankful, da-da-da. So it was a process. But I came away from telling Alexa's story a little because when you cover communities that you don't belong to, you never know what may offend or trigger or lead to something like that. And so it keeps me on my toes. It keeps me on my toes.
I love it that it was like some trans Puerto Ricans that checked you.
Totally.
That makes sense to me, actually.
Totally.
But I think that that it might be something to think more about in terms of who like people who have felt that they haven't had any chance to tell their story, or that their story hasn't even been told at all. And I think on the one hand, part of why Puerto Ricans are so generous with you and love you so unconditionally is because we're not used to seeing our stories told. We're not used to seeing people, putting us on the national news, taking us seriously. And so, that is a responsibility, but, there's also lots of ways in which both your platform at CBS and your social media platforms to help other people, tell their own story. And from Isabella, who it was, but it was in a context where you were saying, I think it's really important to cover Puerto Rico because it's so vulnerable. And you said this is why it's vulnerable. And you described the Puerto Rico's relationship to the United States. It's the way it's dealing with the fiscal board. You described it so perfectly. I'm like, wow, David is really like his knowledge of Puerto Rico between when he first arrived and now is amazing. So do you consider Puerto Rico a colony?
So that's a really good question. I don't know if I am educated enough to make the determination, but I will say I have referred to it as a colony before, and I did it on national television. And the first time I did, I remember watching it back and going, "Did I just say that?"
It wasn't a planned intervention. It just came out.
No. It wasn't like a planned. I'm making a statement here. Here's the way I look at it. If the people you're interviewing use the words colonial aspect, it is not my job to take that label away from them. Now, journalism, I do not believe, is about he said, she said. Because between he said, she said is the truth. So what is the truth? So like if someone were to come and say Puerto Rico was a colony of, Italy, we'd be like, okay, that's a lie. Like I'm not gonna let you go on here and say it's a colony. So no, but I do understand the colonial aspect, and the more I have read about it, yeah, clearly it is. And I've never had anybody argue that it's not. So I mean that's sort of where I am on the. I think the reason I seem a little skittish is I'm leery about people sort of putting a flag in my hand, and I'll tell you what I mean by using that. When I went to the Puerto Rican Day Parade, the one thing my organization was terrified about was me coming into contact with people who would try and use me to make a political point. And there was, I think, the first function before, so the parade was a Saturday, this was a function Thursday night, and I got there and there was a red carpet, and I walked onto the red carpet, and the photographer immediately stuck a flag in my hand and took a picture with it. And the flag that he stuck in my hand was the flag of the lighter color blue. And lighter color blue is not the official flag of the island today. But the lighter color blue represents a large segment of the population in Puerto Rico that identify with it for reasons that you can better explain than I can. But I remember feeling so uncomfortable in that moment because people will sometimes try and assign things or get me to sort of put a flag in the sand, no pun intended, to make a point. And so I'm always careful to say I have very strong opinions. But my opinions are totally irrelevant, right? What is relevant is you've got an opinion, you've got a voice. I want to make sure people hear it, and that's where I put the period.
Has anyone asked you to take a position on status?
Absolutely, all the time. All the time. I think people are very curious to know, and quite frankly, I would be curious to know if I wasn't David Begnaud, what David Begnaud thought. Because here's this guy who loves us and is always here and is representing us. I wonder what he thinks. These are not people who I think are trying to screw me over. These are people who just genuinely want to know, what do you think? And by the way, in private conversations with my partner knows what I think, and we have wonderful discussions. But I don't ever want to be involved in a discussion where I give an opinion. It would be defeating. It would defeat the purpose that I'm trying to serve. Let me say this to you. When I first got there, I assumed that everybody wanted statehood.
Really?
Or because of my privilege. And I've only come to really understand what this word privilege means beyond the usual use of it. But I grew up in a state, and I grew up with voting representation, and I grew up with all this kind of stuff, and the power didn't go out all the time, and the water didn't look brown all the time. So when I got there, I remember thinking, well, of course they need to be a state. They need to be a state because they need X, Y, Z. And then we were doing a documentary, which I still am so glad we did that half-hour documentary. And I remember we interviewed, my team set up a group of people in Old San Juan in this beautiful second-story flat, and we did it. And I'm telling you, those people rocked my world. I walked in and I just assumed that they would say, well, yes. And they were all, I would say, 35 or younger. And most all of them were opposed to statehood. Most all of them were opposed to statehood. And I was like, I said to myself, you really have a lot to learn. Like, you really have a lot to learn in terms of listening to where this is coming from. And so thereby started me on my journey of realizing why they don't want it, or maybe why they do want it.
Yeah, yeah. So what do you say when folks who are not Puerto Rican ask you, well, what do Puerto Ricans want?
To be heard. To be heard.
But, and in regards to status, what do you say?
No. I never am asked about status from someone who's not Puerto Rican.
Oh, really?
I never get a status question from someone who's not Puerto Rican.
Only Puerto Ricans are obsessed with that?
Well, I think only Puerto Ricans are arguably aware of that. I think thereby lies the awareness issue, right? Where people who are not Puerto Rican don't understand what is the biggest discussion. I mean, Ms. Bonilla, every conversation I have with someone at some point trickles back to whether it starts with, ends with, or in the middle, status. Everything. Here in the States, it's Republican or Democrat. In there, it's like status. Everybody wants to talk about status. And so I've never had someone who's not Puerto Rican talk to me about the Puerto Rican status. Nobody. And I think that is an awareness issue. And listen, it's one area where I'm a little reluctant to do it. There's a whole lot of people who want me to, do like a town hall about status. And I think it would be fascinating. But guess what? You got to get that right. You got to get that right. And I don't quite know how to get it right yet.
Yeah. So what do you say when they ask you if the government is as bad as it seems?
I tell them in many ways it's exactly as bad as it seems. Yeah, but I also provide the necessary context that you can't blame today's governor or the one before today's governor for the problems of today. You need to blame the last 10 governors, right? You need to go back to Daddy Rosselló and before, who set the island on a crash course, right? I mean, the train started to derail 25 years ago. And so but again, what I've realized in my business is when you come from a place of wanting to get them, people shut down. At the end of the day, Ricardo Rosselló, who was smart, charismatic, and a liar, was an individual who was the governor of the island. And you may not like, just like Mr. Trump, who people may not like, Mr. Trump, who, I mean, I've never been in a position in Ms. Bonilla where you had to fact check statements that come out the White House before you put them out, but that is the world that we now live in. I introduced those two gentlemen to say they are both the heads of government. And whether you like them or not, you have to deal with them. And I prefer to deal with people humanely and politely. I think even when you're dealing with people like Rosselló, who at the very last press conference, I was the last person to ask questions. I had 8 questions, and I could tell he was like, if the press conference would have ended before he got to me, I think he'd have been so excited. And I think there were so many people wanting me to ask him about why they said what they said about me in their chats, right? And he was critical about the report I did about crime on the island. He said he was going to kill tourism and that kind of stuff. I didn't ask him about that once. I never asked anybody about it because I didn't want to indulge him and give him the satisfaction of making him think that I cared, number one. And number two, that's not important. Him not liking the report we did, there are tons of politicians who don't like the report we do. Get in line and take a number, right? You have to deal with these folks.
Well, and in lots of ways, that was a badge of honor. To be put down by the governor in the chat meant that you were a good journalist, right?
100%. But beyond that, people needed necessary information. Like, is he going to stay? Is he not going to stay? Who would take over then? How is this going to, I was more concerned in that. It was like, okay, yeah, he's trash talking me. Well, great. Because as the chat showed, they thought that I was one of their little lackeys initially. They thought that they would be able to use me in order to help them. And then when they started realizing that, well, he's not going to engage in this and he's not going to do that, then I think that's when the snark started, and it led to what we saw in the show.
Yeah. And how's your relationship with the current administration here?
Very professional. The governor, Wanda Vasquez, does not prefer to do interviews in English, and I am respectful of that. I do not want anyone to be uncomfortable when doing an interview. I've only done one interview with her. We were given 20 minutes, and I think she went on for about 40 or 45. Listen, it's frustrating because they don't respond to requests for information quickly, but they at least pick up the phone. So things operate a little differently in Puerto Rico, and one thing I do appreciate about them, which everybody may not realize, is that at least when I put out a report like Dr. Cabanillas, or I put out a report like the lady who died with symptoms of COVID, and we didn't know whether she would be cremated or properly with dignity and humanely treated urgently. When I put out those reports, something happens. And that doesn't happen here in the States. You can put out a blistering report and it just rolls off the back. But at least the island of, I was made aware, I think 20 minutes after that story of the lady who died with the symptoms of COVID, that the governor was aware and she had seen it.
Yeah. I tell people that actually, because people, talk about the corruption here so much, but there also is, in some ways, a greater measure of democracy here. In some ways, the government listens more, responds more.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And by the way, I believe that we also need to give acknowledgement where it's due. And Ms. Vasquez was far ahead of every other governor compared to governors in the States from the very beginning. And what I've seen since I first got to Puerto Rico was very reactionary. Like the government was just reacting to everything. But arguably, I don't know if any governor who went through Maria would have survived. It was an unforeseen disaster on just epic proportions, right? So they were not prepared, but they weren't prepared when Rosselló came into office, because as I've since learned, and this is very important for people who are not Puerto Rican to understand, because the government is the biggest employer on the island. More than 170,000 people work for the central government. The way it works is they come in, they hire friends, family, and otherwise, and then when the new party comes in, usually 4 years later, because there has not been a two-term governor since Ricky Rosselló's dad in the 90s. When the new party comes in, they wipe out everybody who goes to do whatever, and they bring in their friends and family, and that's how the government works. And so, because there's no sort of continuity in the mainline folks, the paperwork that would usually stay and the people who would understand the processes are turned over every 4 years. So how are you, it's like Trump comes into office, sure, he got rid of a lot of people at the top level and the medium level, but there are still the mainline workers who've been there for 30 years through various administrations. That doesn't happen in Puerto Rico, and that severely affects the citizens.
Yeah. But at the same time, part of why there's so much turnover is because a lot of those folks are just political appointees who sometimes don't even have the qualifications.
So again, just to wrap up this question, Ms. Vasquez deserves the acknowledgement of acting and not reacting, right?
But how did you feel they were managing the earthquake situations?
The earthquake situation was quite interesting. I tried to get an interview, they weren't responding, and probably one of the most awkward videos that was posted was when I was in Jalco. The government didn't know we were in Jalco. We were live for CBS this morning. My team came up to me and they said, the governor just arrived. And I said, well, let's go say hello. And they were like, are you sure you want to do that? And so I said, well, why don't you go tell them I'm going to walk over and say hello? And so they came back, and I could see, and my guy's eyes were pretty big. And he was like, they want to know what you want. And I said, well, I want to ask the governor if there's something she wants. And so,
So she didn't know that you were there, because a lot of people said, "Oh, what a coincidence that she shows up where David Begnaud is."
no. I don't think she knew, because she showed up. I think she showed up right after we got off the. I don't know that there's really any way she could have known. Might she have known? Maybe, but I had no way to prove it. So I went over to say hello, and they asked us not. They said she'll talk to you, but just not on camera. So I said, okay, well we don't have to do an interview. And so her team was rolling with they were holding up a phone, right, for social media. So I told my team, I said, okay, we'll roll on this. And the most awkward thing happened when I walked up. I shook her hand, and she said, it's nice to finally meet you. And I said, you too. And she said, I said something to the effect of, what do you need? And I'll never forget her saying, oh, we're good, like we have what we need. And I remember walking away thinking, how could she not think that that will? So sure enough, the video was posted and people went wild, and predictably.
Yeah.
So that was my first encounter with her, and I remember thinking, oh, this is going to be uncomfortable moving forward. But she was very, very polite, and when we met and did.
You're going back out into the field next week, so what are you going to be doing? COVID stories? What are you going to be doing?
Oh, for sure. Look, I think COVID-19 will be the story that I cover for the next 3 to 6 months. As the lead national correspondent for CBS this morning, my job is to be on whatever is the lead story. So I imagine this is consuming everything. I mean, it's so different in that people who otherwise may not watch the news and may only watch sports or whatever. Well, sports is canceled. There is no sports, right? Sitcoms, movies, all that is stopped. Like the only thing that is sort of current and being updated today, as I look at the television now, Italy reports 793 virus deaths in the last day. That is the most in one day. So they set a new record today. Yesterday they set a record compared to the day before, and the day before they set a record compared to the day before that. Anyway, I expect to be on this for the foreseeable future, and people are really paying attention. And what I want to do is make sure that we bring what you need to know. Like I just want to forget everything about, morning shows are about getting your day started and kind of making you feel good and giving you a little fun stuff here and there. And as far as I'm concerned, like people just want the information. Like, just tell me where we are, tell me what's going to happen, tell me if we're okay, tell me what I need to worry about. And I'm anxious to be involved in sharing those facts. So I'm looking forward to getting back out.
Yeah. How do you think you'll balance? Because people want facts, but at the same time, a lot of people are saying that they're trying to measure their exposure to the news, that that it's really depressing them. And I think part of why so many people have been turning, I go to speak for myself. Like, I've been more interested in watching your feeds and stuff to hear, the impact on daily lives, and to kind of balance that out with, the news of Italy, etc. How do you think your coverage, how are you going to balance that?
So I really look for opportunities like the 87-year-old Marine, because when I got the call saying they want to talk to you, I was so excited. I was like, oh my, would I like to do it? Are you kidding me? I would absolutely, because I knew that would be a positive story of hope on a relevant issue like this.
Right,
there are people who want me to follow up on the warehouse, on Alexa, on other stuff that is not related to Puerto Rico. And I always tell them, I hear you and I know it's important, but this is my front burner issue right now.
Yeah.
And so that's how I do it. That's how I try and stay away from just what seems like bad news and inject the story of this gentleman who survived. But to that point, and I want to say this, I get a lot, not a lot, but I regularly get people who say, where's the good news? You're not telling the good news. Here's the thing. When you share good news, it gets about 15% of the reaction to the bad news.
Really?
Oh, yes. So here's what I say to people. You have to back up what you're asking for. If you want good news, then you have to engage and interact with the good news when it is shared and posted, and you need to make it clear that that is what you want. Because anybody can walk around complaining, but then, it's like people who complain but don't go to vote. Don't complain if you're not going to vote, right? Don't say, I want positive, positive, positive if you're not going to engage with it. Because the engagement, there's plenty of people who want the real news. And the reality, Ms. Bonilla, is that life is really depressing in some ways. That's the reality of life. That's the news flash for everybody. I think the tone in which we deliver it, I think the amount in which we provide it is important to not overloading people. But as we do the positive news, I get a little frustrated because it's like, oh, you said you wanted positive news, but I didn't see any engagement on that.
Yeah. Do you want to do positive news?
I absolutely do, because it is not only positive and hopeful for me, I believe that people benefit from it. Like, here's the benefit from that 87-year-old man. We're being told that people his age are the most vulnerable, especially people who have underlying health conditions. So for him to survive it, somebody like me says, wow. For a doctor who watches the interview, they want to know, what did you treat him with? How did you test him? How long did you monitor him? When did you do this? When did you do, what antibiotic did you use? I mean, this is happening in real time. There aren't any New England Journal of Medicine articles that doctors can go and research to find out how it's been treated around the country.
Yeah.
So
well, and some of the studies coming out of Italy, they say that men are twice as likely to die than women from the virus. So that makes it even more exceptional, his story. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, I personally have been trying to, because I'm like a news junkie and, always, I like Twitter because I like to be angry and all of that. But in these last few days, I've been trying to balance out because I've been telling my friends who are just starting now the shutdown in New York, I'm like, oh, I'm going on week 2, and let me tell you, I got food, I got toilet paper. The hardest thing is my mood, it just, and it's not even like concerned about me and my family because we're safe, but just about what's going to happen in Puerto Rico with the hospital system, like what's going to happen in the world and what this is all going to look like. So I decided I had to at least see one positive story, and for me it's not just like feel good, like, oh, cute puppy or something. But, for example, looking at how people in Asia are starting to get back to normal, or a new normal, right? But how, there is, there's the curve and the curve comes down,
I agree. Pet videos are cute. But I'd rather give you some good news about the current most pressing issue, like what you're talking about.